Hello again, my name is David Grasky, and I'm an instructor for the Hinda Institute in Walder Foundation's course entitled Pursuing One's Legal Rights Post-Petition. This final clip, involving Session 2, discusses the changes in the prison system, focusing on mental health issues, all of which impact litigation results. It is our hope that you find the discussion both instructive and helpful. We hope you enjoy.
A friend of mine in California actually has a wonderful bar graph that they use, which has each of his cases across the top and then a red line down the middle as to when they won the case and how long it took to enforce. And the enforcement side in almost every one of his cases is far longer than the winning side. So we're in it for the long term. I think the answer is both, is the answer to your question. Yes, there have been definitely some positive changes. And let me talk about mental health care, because that's what I spent the last 2 weeks working on, is our mental health case. And what we were doing was putting together a court presentation as to why they weren't complying. The answer is they weren't complying, and we were figuring out how to prove it. That doesn't mean there haven't been any positive things at all. So just to cite a couple of things, and I have to emphasize, Illinois' mental health system was really, really bad. So there was a really low floor to make some improvements. So one of the basic things that every mental health system should have is a treatment plan for everybody. What are you trying? What is the diagnosis, and what are the steps you're going to take to try to treat that diagnosis? Nobody in Illinois had a treatment plan. That was unheard of. It was not a thing they had. Everybody would be seen by a psychiatrist or a social worker as if it was their very first time ever being seen. You would see people who had diagnoses that changed every month, and they would change the medication to meet the new diagnosis, and there was no kind of coordination between anybody. That's all stopped. Everybody in Illinois who's on the mental health caseload now has a treatment plan. Doesn't mean they're good treatment plans, but at least they have one. And the other big change that's obvious is we've got some mental health space now. So Illinois was, I think, the only state in the country which did not have a mental health hospital for people who were in corrections. And what that meant was we put people in solitary who should have been in a hospital, because that was the only option we had. We now have a mental health hospital. It's only got 44 beds, so it's way too small. But they're in the midst of constructing a hospital which will have 400 beds. So eventually we will have a hospital that will treat enough people in Illinois who are very seriously mentally ill. So that's the very most seriously mentally ill people who just cannot survive outside of a hospital setting, at least for a while, until they get stabilized. The hope is not that they're going to be there forever, but that they'll be stabilized and they can go back into the general population. The third thing is we now have 4 specialized mental health treatment units. One, interestingly enough, I talked about how they closed down juvenile prisons. So one of those juvenile prisons was repurposed as an all mental health treatment prison. So they don't have guards there anymore. They changed their title and therefore their job requirements and their training to be correctional treatment officers. So they're very much part of the mental health treatment team. And then there's a lot of social workers, et cetera. So they provide better care than you get any place else in the system, which does not mean, I want to emphasize, that they're getting good care. It just means it's better than every place else. And then they also constructed rooms so they can do things like group therapy, private space for consultations, and all the other physical changes you need in the women's prison and 2 other men's prisons. Significant reconstruction inside those prisons, so there is actual space to provide mental health care. You can't do it in a traditional prison where, what used to happen is people go to your cell front and scream at you through what's often a solid metal door. You can imagine it's really difficult to develop a trusting relationship with your therapist when you both have to scream through a solid door. And everybody on the unit can hear what you're saying, and your cellmate can hear what you're saying, and everybody can hear what the psychiatrist is saying. So that is not a way to provide mental health care. That doesn't happen anymore. Almost all, pre-COVID anyway, the mental health interactions are done in a private setting where there's where guards can have visual surveillance of what's happening, but they can't hear what's happening. At least that's the theory. Again, it's not perfect, That's one of the things we're going in on. A couple of our prisons don't do that very well. And it's all kind of, most of this is broken down under COVID, frankly. So yes, there are things that are changing, but there's lots of work to be done. I will not say the fact that because we get a verdict means that everything automatically changes the next day. It doesn't happen that way. But let me just say, I think this fits very nicely in with a larger struggle that's happening all over the country as to how the police should respond when they get a call from somebody mentally ill. And there's a real movement to have those responses done with a social worker instead of a police officer. That's what most people who have mental illness need is mental health care. They don't need a police officer who might shoot them. And I think that the sort of sensitivity you're talking about is sort of one step beyond that, but down the same path. These are people who have violated probation or parole or whatever in some way, but their real underlying problem is a mental health problem. And therefore, both the police in the first instance and certainly the courts should be much more sensitive to the difference between mental health issues and criminality. And unfortunately fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how it plays out, I think that could be said of many people who are involved in the criminal justice system. To use one of my favorite lines, I'm not in favor of second chances for people because my feeling is most people in prison never got a first chance. And what most people need is actually a first chance. I've met too many people in prison who, went through horrific childhood, everything from watching their friends be shot down next to them to, familial abuse or hunger or whatever, or homelessness, all those things that lead you as a child to be traumatized. You carry that trauma through to adulthood, and that affects your brain. It affects how you react to things. So, that's what I'm saying is I think that the courts in general have to be much more sensitive to the realities of the world rather than just treating all people who don't comply with rules as criminals. This country is just addicted to criminalization. The other thing I always like to sort of sum up my view on this is this society uses prison as a way to hide its problems rather than solve them. And that unfortunately is what we see all the time. And we'd be much better off in the long run if we would solve all these problems rather than throwing people in prison where nobody gets better by going to prison. Nobody. So that's my pitch. There are lawyers who are looking to try to figure out how to bring those cases. I got to tell you, they're hard cases to bring. Early on, nobody knew how to prevent COVID, and proving that the prison could have, what you have to prove here is the prison knew about what they should have done and intentionally failed not to do it, a deliberate indifference standard.
Right.
And that's going to be tough to prove in a lot of prison situations. I know there are lawyers who are looking to try to figure out how to bring a good damage case. What we don't want to do is make bad law.
Right.
Bring some of these cases that are going to lose and then make it harder for the next guy to bring the case. But I think you're talking probably about Rosenbein.
Yeah, Rosenbein. Yeah.
Yeah. I know they're interested in this idea, but haven't figured out how to bring that case yet, nor have we. Nor has another firm here that brings a lot of damages actions. We're all looking for that case and trying to figure out the right theory, because as you say, there are potentially thousands of people here, but I'm afraid that it may be very difficult. And I also got to say, qualified immunity, which has been in the news a little bit here about police officers, is
That's
going to
crazy.
be a problem for COVID as well.
Yeah.
It's a pandemic that nobody in the correction system had faced before.